I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our Microsoft Access playlist, and we're going to take a look at basic reporting in Microsoft Access. And what I want to do today is I want to give a very basic foundation for those of you who have not used reports yet, or you're kind of confused about how Microsoft Access reports work. We're going to go through some of the basics and talk about all the things that affect reports and how reports are used and where they're used and when you can use them and all those kinds of things. So let's get to it. If you haven't done it yet, make sure to vote on my latest poll. Click on the community tab and you can find it there. So many of you guys who are just getting started have asked me, what is an Access report and how do I use it and where would I use it and why would I use it in my application that I want to build? And that's a great question because Access reports are indeed very, very powerful. And so what Access objects are is they are one of the main Access objects, like a table or a query or a form or a macro. And Access reports have their own very special characteristics that allow you to accomplish a lot of things that you'll want to do with your application. And what they do is they help you to view your data from many different sources in a useful way, allowing you to take, 2 tables or 3 tables or, a couple of queries in a table and put those together into a single report that'll be used for things like meetings or status reports and those kinds of things. And that is exactly what Access reports are designed for. And because they were designed to be used as a visual, they are designed for printers and print design. And so they have a very close relationship with printers and print drivers and things like that in the background. So that the output that comes from your report looks beautiful when it comes out. And unlike forms, which you may have seen before, which are used for data entry, reports are not used for data entry. They're not used to change the data in any way. Reports are used to report on the data in order to make it useful for non-technical users. And in preparing the data for consumption by, managers and engineers and all kinds of other people, your report can include custom calculations and all kinds of programming to make it exactly what you need to see for whatever business process it is that you're trying to achieve. And as mentioned, it can consume, one or many tables or queries, and it can also use all kinds of macros and things or programming to execute, procedures before a report runs so that you can have sort of like a big, data transformation that can happen before the report is opened. And so that's very, very handy, and it's one of the things that makes reports so useful. And another thing to note is that the data is always in the current state. And so each time that you double click to open a report or you use a command button to launch a report in your application, it will always open the data to whatever the state of your tables are, the data in your database. And so if you open it 1 minute and you have 5 orders for your order application, and then you close it and then you get 5 more orders in your database, and then you open the report again, it will have 10 in there. And so that is how reports work. They're always current state, so that means you can run them at any time to give an as of report in your business, and that is very, very handy. And of course, where do you design it? Well, you design it in the design view, very similar to how forms work. So you can open it in design, and it has a drag and drop sort of WYSIWYG type of designer that looks kind of similar to how forms work, but is actually quite different due to the sections and groupings and things like that, which you will see in this video. Now in the Access interface, you can see report objects, and you can tell that they are reports by seeing the little book here, and you'll get one book for each of the reports that you have and one book for each of the sub-reports that you create if you create sub-reports as well. And so it is quite easy to make a new report. We can go here. I've got this little database here, and the first report I'm going to create is a little summary report on this data, which you can see has a Candy Co. and a maker and date worked and how many hours and things like that. And if I scroll to the end of this table, you can see it has this 444 rows and a very simple table. And if we wanted to make a report, we could do so by going to the Create ribbon, and then we could choose the report wizard, but we can also choose the report design if we wanted, but we'll use the wizard today. And all we're going to do is we're going to choose 3 fields from that table that I showed you. We're going to choose the Candy Company, the date worked, and the hours, and that's going to give us this nice little display here. And in the next step, we can choose the groupings that we want. And so I want to see all of the hours worked by the Candy Company each month. And so in order to do that, I've added 2 of the grouping levels there, and you can see I can change the grouping interval if I want to. I can choose, you know, something like I could do it by quarter, or I could do it by year, or I could change the way the Candy Company is grouped. But I don't need to do that because it chose month by default. But on the next screen, I can choose the summary options, and I do want to see the sum. Now I don't want to see a line for every row in each grouping. I only want to see the summary, and just for fun, I'll also calculate the percentage of the sums so that we can see how they are related to the total. And I'm going to choose the stepped report and the portrait, and then I'll add a name to my report. I'll just call it Candy Maker's report for now, and you can choose to preview it as the designer, the wizard, has designed it. And so you can see here, this is what comes out, and this is a Microsoft Access report. Now this is a default report. We didn't do any styling to it ourselves, but you can see that it is already laid out for print. And so it's gonna, do the nice page breaks in between each page, and so that we don't have any data cut off. And you can see that it's created our sum and our grouping by month. And so each of those percentages adds up, and each of these sums add up. And you can see that, in January, the summary for the date worked for the total records was 192.5, and it's 9% of the total of the 12 months that were in the data set. And so you can go through, and this can be used for all kinds of operational purposes. You can print it out and hand it out to 20 people if you're working in a manufacturing or whatever. And so you can see that it is nice for that. And at the bottom of the page, it has the date on it automatically, and it also has the page number. And so we can scroll ahead to page 5 using the buttons at the bottom, and we can see that we get this sort of default report. Now we could style this to make it look a lot better, and lots of people actually do spend hours and hours and hours styling these reports, because you can change all the fonts, and you can change basically everything in here to look and work for your company situation. You can even add branding and all kinds of stuff like that. But what I wanted to show you was the wizard and how easy it is to make that report. Now when we closed it, it automatically went to design view, and you can see we can take any of these default outputs that were created by the wizard, and we can put our own sort of header in there for the labels. Now we can change any of the labels that came out just by clicking on them and changing them. And there are also text boxes. So in this case, you can see this is a text box with a formula in it to show the month of the grouping. Now, the report, you'll see these sort of horizontal lines here, and each of these is a section of the report that is sort of related to how the data comes out. So we've got two headers here, and a page header at the very top, and then the detail section is sort of where the most granular of your data is considered. So in this case, you can see it's the date worked and the hours. Those are included in the detail, and so those are the detail records for the report. And then the Candy Company footer there, you see the footer is going to be that's a footer for that section. So this is going to be printed, for every company that is output. You'll see this one presented. And so you can also change the labels here. I changed that one to percent instead of standard. And then you can see there's another footer down below there too. That one has the date worked footer in it. It's got data that is related. So that means that inside the section, every date worked section, it's also going to have some sums and things like that. And so, for example, January will have a total and February will have a total. And then below that we have the page footer, and that has the date and the pages, and then the report footer is on the very bottom, and that will have some calculations in it. And so as you can see, with the detail being the most granular and the Candy Co is less granular, the date worked is less granular, and then the footer and the report footer itself are the least, and they can have calculations as well. And then going from the middle to the top, we start with the detail again, and we get less and less granular as we go to the top of the report here. And so this is a report with several groupings in it, and so it's a little more complex. We're going to do a very simple one in a moment, but I wanted to show you the fact that those are there, those groupings and things. And so we can open the report in several different views. Now I just opened the report view there, and you can see that we can view this report without any pages or page breaks or anything like that. And we can scroll down through the report, and we can view the numbers as they were generated from the query on the table that we chose. And you can see that works just great for on-screen viewing, and you can see it actually has only page 1 of 1, because in this viewing mode we don't really have any pages per se. It's sort of like one great big report that you can view on screen, and this is very handy, like if you're in a meeting or whatever and you want to be able to scroll through without using pagination, then you can do that. Now if I right click on the tab here and I go to the layout view, we can also make changes to the report in here. I won't go into any of this today, but you can make changes to your report in the layout view to make those fine changes and move things around and those kinds of things. And then if I go to the tab again and right click and go to the print preview, this is the mode that 90%, I'm going to say 90% of people will work in, and this is the actual paginated view. So this has been formatted for the letter size paper, and so you can see how it's logical that it would be tightly integrated with the printer, and that is absolutely the case. And so this is formatted for letter size, and you can see we can view it in 2-page mode if we want. And don't worry about not seeing the detail here. This is more to show how the page layout works and those kinds of things. And so we can scroll backwards and forwards through our report in the paginated view. And if you have a big monitor, then these look great. But the primary purpose of these is for print. And so I'll close it there. I'm going to say yes to my design changes, and I can go back to my my navigation pane, and now you can see we do have a report here, and it is using the little icon, the little book icon for a report. And if I double click it, it does open to the report view, and you can see the difference between if I used just a query or a table or if I actually used a report. The report can tell me lots of interesting information, and that's what we want to see there. Now, using a table as the basis of your report or the source for your report is not usually the norm. You can use a table, although once your application becomes even a little bit sophisticated, you'll start using queries for your report instead of tables. And so what I'm going to do here, you guys don't need to know this part of it yet, but I will demonstrate. I'm just going to make a new query choosing design view. Now you can just close that little pop-up there, and I'm just going to drag 3 tables onto the form here. And what these tables have is these are 3 tables, and the middle table there, that one is a junction table in SQL. And so this table here, this candy box items, that is a junction. That means candies are one-to-many with the items, and candy box is one-to-many with the items. And so now we can make a single view that has all the candy boxes with the candies in each box. And so that's sort of how these things are generated in an SQL database, in your Access database as well. All we have to do, if we've got all the right joins there, is we can just grab the fields that we want, and we're just going to sort it by the box and then the candy, and our candy type and then the candy name, and then that should be good enough for a very simple query as the basis for our next here. And so we'll name it candy query, and then we'll save that, and now we have a query which is the full listing of all the boxes and the candies that are inside of those. And so you can see here, these are all the candies that are in box 1A and all of the ones in box 1B and 1C. And so there we go. We've got each of the candies that are in the box, and so we could show the query data itself, for our meeting or whatever. But that's not very nice presentation. It's not a very nice presentation. And so we can use the wizard again, and so I've chosen my candy query and all the fields there, and this time I'll skip the groupings, and I actually don't need to put the sort in here because it will take the underlying sort from the query. And so there we go. I'll choose the default tabular, which is a bit different from columnar there, and the portrait mode, and I'll save this as our candy query report. You could name it what you like, and then we could click finish and we'd be almost done. And so there we go. We've got our nice paginated report that comes up, and you can see all of the line items in it, sorted according to the box. And so we can see if we wanted a list report and just a list, with no summaries or anything on it, then we could very easily make this into a nice printable report. You can see that the page is set for the letter size, and in fact it is connected to my printer settings, and so it will print differently, slightly differently, depending on what printer I've chosen for my default printer. And that's an important thing to remember, is your default printer is very important. You should make sure that you set it before you start running your application and printing reports and things like that, because it can make a difference to the margins and things. Each printer is a little bit different, and so generally you'll design for one or another style of printer, or you'll use a lowest common denominator approach. But you can see, if I open this report in design view, you can see it's very, very simple. It doesn't have all of the other sections that the other report had with the grouping sections, but it still has the page header, the report header, and the detail and everything. And but this is kind of like the simplest report, just a simple listing report that is used off of a query. And the query might be super complex, and so that's usually something that happens. You might have a query that comes off of like 10 different tables and has all kinds of information, but the output is a simple list, and so you would use a report like this for that situation. And so you can see there's 1,000,001 combinations of how you could do this, and that's what makes reports so powerful. You can see we were able to change our header there, and we can view this in a bit more detail. If we scroll down and scroll over, I can scroll down using the roller on my mouse if I want to look at this. This is a paginated report, and there are all kinds of settings that you can set. That alternating row style you see there, we can set that up where it's slightly shaded on each second row and things like that. But we can also change things like the margins. There are some margins that you can get from the presets here, or you can do custom ones. And the same thing with your size, paper sizes. If you're in Europe, you'll probably be using the A3, A4, A5. If you're in North America, you'll use letter and the others. And if we go to our print, you can see this has actually been set up. I had my default set to the PDF printer, and I can check out the different settings for that inside of there. But really, I don't want to use the PDF printer. I'll use my brother printer that I have here. And so that's going to change the way that it works slightly in the output. So if I design for that brother printer, I'll be able to do very specific printing jobs, and you will be able to as well if you use your printer. And so those are the very basics of Microsoft Access reports in the most simplest way of using a table or a query for the basis for your report. And we created 2 reports there, and the Candy Makers report and the Candy Query report. And we definitely want to be able to use tables or queries and all kinds of things, and that's super useful for making applications that rely on reporting. And there's 1,000,001 ways you can use reports: operational, statistical. You can copy government forms all filled in. You can do visualizations, trigger an ETL, do some custom calculations, even tickets, and crazy formatting. And that's an intro to reports in Microsoft Access. Looking for more articles and cool stuff on topics in this area? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description.